Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. The thing about frontier trading outposts is that they're built by the lowest bidder, maintained by whoever's sober enough to hold a wrench, and generally held together by spite and optimism in equal measure. Rendix 9 was no exception to this universal truth. A collection of prefab structures, open-air markets, and cargo bays that clung to the planet's surface like barnacles on a ship's hull. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't safe, and it definitely wasn't where anyone ended up by accident. Fiona had been on Rendix 9 for 8 months, which was about 6 months longer than most humans lasted before they decided the frontier life wasn't quite as romantic as the recruitment hollows made it seem. But Fiona wasn't most humans, a fact she reminded herself of daily, usually while covered in engine grease or arguing with a cargo manifest that made absolutely no sense. She was hauling crates from her ship to a storage depot when the sky decided to throw a tantrum. Now, electrical storms on Rendix 9 weren't like Earth storms. Earth storms were quaint little atmospheric disturbances that occasionally knocked out power and made people complain about their hair. Rendix 9 storms were the universe's way of reminding everyone that nature could absolutely murder you if it felt like it. The air itself turned purple, actually purple, like someone had spilled grape juice across the atmosphere, and the static charge built up so fast that metal surfaces started sparking on their own. "Oh, come on," Fiona muttered, watching the horizon turn into an angry bruise. "I just need 20 more minutes." The universe, as usual, ignored her completely reasonable request. The marketplace erupted into chaos. Vendors were scrambling to pack up their goods, shouting in at least 9 different languages, none of which Fiona fully understood, but panic translated pretty well across species. A Brentari merchant knocked over a display of crystalline sculptures in his haste, and they shattered across the ground like very expensive confetti. Someone's cargo drone sparked and fell from the sky, adding to the general atmosphere of disaster. Fiona grabbed the last crate, 20 kilos of who knows what for a client who probably wouldn't even tip, and started speed-walking toward the nearest shelter. The first crackle of ionic discharge split the air above her, and every hair on her body stood straight up. Not a pleasant sensation. Not at all. That's when she heard it. A sound that didn't quite fit with the chaos around her. Something small, something terrified, something that made her stupid human brain go, "Oh no, something needs help," even though her rational mind was screaming about finding shelter before she got fried like a circuit board. She shouldn't have looked. She really, truly, absolutely should not have looked. But of course, she looked. In the narrow gap between 2 storage units, barely an alley, really, more like a crack in the outpost's haphazard layout, 2 small shapes huddled against the wall. They were roughly the size of house cats, covered in dark scales that seemed to shimmer even in the storm's strange light, with oversized eyes that reflected the purple sky like mirrors. Fiona's brain, which had apparently decided that today was a great day to make terrible decisions, immediately supplied, "Those are Nexian cubs." Her survival instinct, which was usually pretty reliable, added, "Nexians are apex predators, whose adults can tear through starship hulls, and you should run." The cubs whimpered, a sound that bypassed every logical thought and went straight to some ancient mammalian part of her brain that said, "Baby in distress." "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Fiona said to no one in particular, because talking to yourself was one of the perks of working alone in space. "This is how I die. This is literally how I die," Not in a heroic cargo run, not defending the outpost from raiders, but because I couldn't walk past baby murder lizards in a storm. Another discharge cracked overhead, close enough that Fiona felt the static in her teeth. The cubs pressed themselves flatter against the wall, and one of them, the smaller one, made a sound that was somehow both a hiss and a cry. "Nope, nope, we're not doing this," Fiona announced, even as her feet carried her toward the alley. "We're absolutely not. Oh, for the love of—" She dropped the crate. The client could file a complaint. The client could file 50 complaints. Fiona was too busy scooping up 2 terrified alien predators and tucking them inside her weather jacket before another lightning strike could turn them all into a very unfortunate statistic. The cubs latched onto her immediately, and when Nexians latched onto something, they meant it. Tiny claws dug through her shirt and into her skin, not quite breaking through, but definitely making their presence known. They were trembling so hard she could feel it against her ribs, their scales surprisingly warm. Their bodies curled into tight balls of concentrated fear. "Okay, okay, I've got you," Fiona heard herself saying, which was absolutely insane because she did not, in fact, have this situation under control in any meaningful way. "Just stay still, stay quiet, and maybe we all survive the next 10 minutes. She zipped her jacket up as far as it would go, which wasn't quite far enough to hide 2 squirming cubs, but it would have to do. Then she grabbed her crate again, because she was already having a terrible day, might as well commit to it, and ran. The storm hit full force as she sprinted across the marketplace. Purple lightning danced between the buildings, each strike accompanied by a sound like reality tearing at the seams. The ozone smell was overwhelming, mixed with the sharp scent of burning electronics and the general panic sweat of multiple species all trying not to die at the same time. A Colian ran past her, all 6 legs pumping in synchronized terror. A flying merchant's stall tumbled end over end down the main corridor, scattering goods like seeds. Somewhere behind her, something exploded with a sound that suggested expensive repairs in someone's future. The cubs dug their claws in deeper, and Fiona felt a vibration against her chest, a rapid thrumming that might have been their equivalent of a heartbeat, or might have been the storm's interference with their bioelectric systems, or might have been her own heart trying to escape her rib cage through sheer force of panic. Her cargo bay loomed ahead, squat, ugly, and the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. The door controls sparked when she slapped her hand against them, but they opened, and she threw herself inside just as a particularly vicious bolt of lightning hit exactly where she'd been standing 3 seconds earlier. The door sealed behind her with a pneumatic hiss, and the storm's roar became a muffled rumble. Fiona stood there for a moment, breathing hard, acutely aware that she had approximately 200 problems, and they were all related to the fact that she was currently smuggling apex predator babies inside her jacket. "Right," she said to the empty cargo bay. So that happened. The cubs, apparently deciding that the immediate danger had passed, loosened their death grip on her torso just enough to poke their heads out of her jacket. 4 enormous eyes stared up at her, still wide with fear, but also now filled with something that might have been curiosity. They were, Fiona had to admit, kind of adorable in a might grow up to eat my face sort of way. Their scales were obsidian black, with faint bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in time with their breathing. Typical Nexian coloring, from what she remembered of the species' databases. Their snouts were blunt and slightly crooked, giving them a lopsided appearance that would have been comical if Fiona wasn't acutely aware of the rows of needle-sharp teeth visible when they opened their mouths. "So," Fiona said, because talking to animals was apparently her coping mechanism now, "I don't suppose either of you knows where your pack is?" The smaller cub, the one who'd made that particular cry that had doomed them all, tilted its head at her. The gesture was eerily intelligent, like it was actually trying to understand her words, despite the whole different species entirely thing. The larger cub, meanwhile, had apparently decided Fiona was safe, and was now attempting to climb up her jacket to reach her shoulder. Its claws caught in the fabric, and it dangled there for a moment, looking deeply offended by physics. "Oh, no, you don't. Hey, stop that." Fiona tried to detach the cub, which resulted in it clinging harder and making a sound somewhere between a chirp and a growl. "Great. Fantastic. I rescue you from a storm. And this is the thanks I get." She managed to extract both cubs and set them on the floor of her cargo bay, which was a mistake, because they immediately tried to climb back up her legs. "No, down, stay. Do Nexians even understand commands?" Fiona backed away, and the cubs followed, their movements already coordinated despite their small size. Pack hunters from birth, apparently. "Listen, we need to establish some boundaries here. I saved you, which was very noble and probably very stupid, but that doesn't mean you can just stop looking at me like that." The smaller cub had sat down and was staring at her with those huge, reflective eyes. And somehow, Fiona felt like she was the one being judged in this situation. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, Fiona had a staring contest with a baby apex predator, and was pretty sure she was losing. This was going to be a long night. The storm wasn't letting up. If anything, it was getting worse. The kind of worse that made the cargo bay's walls groan, and the emergency lighting flicker in a way that suggested the power grid was having philosophical doubts about continuing to exist. Fiona sat on a cargo container, watching the two Nexian cubs explore her bay with the kind of fearless curiosity that all babies seem to possess regardless of species. They sniffed everything, pawed at everything, and occasionally looked back at her as if to confirm she was still there. Which was weird, because she definitely hadn't signed up to be a Nexian babysitter. "You know," she said conversationally to the cubs, "in a sane universe, you two would be terrified of me. Humans are predators too. Apex predators, technically, though we mostly use that for hunting down the last slice of pizza." The larger cub, Fiona had started thinking of it as big, chirped at her and tried to climb a stack of supply crates. It made it about halfway up before its claws lost purchase and it tumbled backward, landing on its back with all four legs in the air. It lay there for a moment, looking deeply confused about how gravity worked. "Yeah, that's about how my life's going, too," Fiona muttered. The smaller cub, Little, because Fiona's naming creativity was apparently exhausted for the day, was sniffing around the edges of her storage lockers. It moved with a pronounced limp, favoring its right front paw, and now that Fiona was actually looking instead of running for her life, she could see the burn mark across its scales. "Oh, no," Fiona said, sliding off the container. "No, no, no. Come here, let me see that." Little looked at her warily, but when Fiona crouched down and held out her hand, the cub hobbled over. Either it trusted her, or it was in enough pain that it didn't care anymore. Given what Fiona knew about Nexian pack instincts, probably the former. They bonded fast and hard with whoever they perceived as protectors, which meant she was in so much trouble. Fiona gently picked up the cub. It was heavier than it looked, solid muscle under those scales, and carried it to her workbench. Little made a small sound of protest, but didn't struggle, which told Fiona exactly how much pain it was in. "Okay, let's see. what we're working with here." She activated the workbench light and examined the paw. The burn was ugly, second degree at least, the scales cracked and oozing a clear fluid that she really hoped wasn't Nexian blood, because she had no idea how to deal with Nexian blood. "Storm got you, huh? Ionic discharge?" Little chirped, which Fiona chose to interpret as agreement. "Right. So I've got a first aid kit that's designed for humans, some basic supplies for the common species, and absolutely nothing specifically for Nexian cubs, because why would I?" Fiona pulled out her medical kit, a battered metal box that had seen better decades. "We're going to have to improvise, and you're going to have to trust me not to make this worse." She dug through the kit, pulling out antiseptic, synthetic skin patches, and pain gel. The antiseptic should work. It was broad spectrum, designed to handle silicon-based, carbon-based, and the weird in-between biology that most species fell into. The synthetic skin was a gamble, but burns were burns across most biological models. "This is going to sting," Fiona warned, even though Little definitely didn't understand English. "But after it stings, it'll feel better." Probably. Hopefully. Medical science is more art than science out here on the frontier. She applied the antiseptic, and Little hissed, actually hissed, a sound that made every instinct in Fiona's body scream about danger. But the cub didn't pull away, just trembled, and made that thrumming sound again, the vibration traveling up through Fiona's hands and arms. "Good. Yeah, you're doing great," Fiona said, working as quickly as she could. The synthetic skin patch went on next, conforming to the shape of the paw and sealing the burn. Not perfect, but it would keep infection out and speed healing. "There, all done. You're officially patched up." Little looked at its paw, then at Fiona, then did something that made Fiona's heart do an uncomfortable flip. It pressed its head against her chest and started purring. Except it wasn't purring, not exactly. It was that thrumming sound, but deeper, more resonant, and Fiona could feel it in her rib cage, like a second heartbeat. The sound wrapped around her bones and made something in her hindbrain relax, despite the absurdity of the situation. "Oh, you're dangerous," Fiona said softly. "Not because of the teeth and claws. Because of that." Big, apparently feeling left out, bounded over and headbutted Fiona's knee hard enough to bruise. When she looked down, it was staring up at her with those reflective eyes, and its stomach made a sound like a dying engine. "Hungry, huh?" Fiona set Little down gently and turned to Big. "When's the last time you ate?" Big's ribs were visible under its scales, and now that Fiona was looking, so were Little's. These cubs hadn't just gotten separated in the storm. They'd been lost for a while. Days, maybe. However long it took for Nexian metabolism to start eating itself. "Right. Food. I can do food." Fiona stood and walked to her cold storage unit. "I've got ration bars, some kind of freeze-dried stew that tastes like regret, protein paste. Oh, who am I kidding? You're carnivores." She pulled out a package of preserved meat, something vaguely resembling Earth beef, but probably from an animal that had never seen Earth. It was meant for her own consumption, but she had more, and these cubs looked like they were about to keel over. Fiona tore open the package, and both cubs' heads snapped toward her with laser focus. Their pupils dilated to full black, and she got a very clear view of their teeth as their mouths opened slightly. "Okay, so definitely carnivores," she said, trying to ignore the part of her brain that was calculating exactly how fast they could move if they decided she looked tastier than the meat. "Here, let's try this." She tossed a piece to Big, who caught it mid-air with reflexes that should not have been possible for something that had face-planted off a crate 5 minutes ago. The cub swallowed it whole, then looked at Fiona with an expression that clearly communicated more. Little was more cautious, sniffing the piece Fiona offered before taking it delicately from her hand. The small teeth barely grazed her palm, and Little chewed carefully, as if each bite needed to be thoroughly evaluated before swallowing. Different personalities already, Fiona mused, feeding them more pieces. Big's the bold one, Little's the thinker. That's going to be a problem when you're fully grown and the size of small vehicles. She fed them until the package was empty and their bellies were visibly rounded. Then both cubs curled up on her workbench, pressed against each other, and promptly fell asleep with the suddenness that only children, any species of children, could manage. Fiona stood there, covered in engine grease and Nexian cub drool, watching two baby apex predators sleep on her workbench like it was the most natural thing in the universe. "This is fine," she said to the empty cargo bay. "This is totally fine. I've got 2 Nexian cubs in my ship. Their pack is probably tearing apart the outpost looking for them, and when they find out a human has their babies, they're going to— Actually, I don't want to think about what they're going to do." Outside, the storm continued its assault on Rendix 9. Inside, Fiona pulled up her datapad and started searching through the outpost's network for any information about Nexian pack behavior. Because if she was going to die tomorrow, she at least wanted to understand why. What she found didn't make her feel better. Nexians were pack hunters. That much she knew. But what she hadn't known was that cubs imprinted during their first major storm, an evolutionary trait that bonded them to whoever kept them safe during a moment of primal terror. It ensured pack cohesion, guaranteed that cubs would follow and learn from their protectors, and created loyalty that lasted a lifetime. "Oh no," Fiona said, scrolling through the data. "Oh no, no, no." Cubs who imprinted didn't just recognize someone as safe, they recognized them as pack, as family, as someone worth defending and following and, according to this absolutely terrifying biology article, someone whose scent they would carry for the rest of their lives. Fiona looked at the sleeping cubs, then back at her datapad, then at the cubs again. "I am in so much trouble," she said. The cubs, unburdened by the knowledge of just how complicated their existence had made Fiona's life, continued sleeping. Little's injured paw twitched in some dream, and Big made a sound like a tiny growl, probably dreaming about catching something. Fiona sat down on her crate again and pulled up the outpost's communication logs, searching for any mention of Nexian packs in the area. There were 6 reported sightings in the past 3 days, all of them moving through the outpost's perimeter, searching, hunting, looking for something they'd lost, looking for these 2. "Tomorrow is going to be interesting," Fiona said, which was perhaps the greatest understatement of her life. "Tomorrow, I'm going to have to find a pack of apex predators and explain that I accidentally adopted their cubs. That'll go well. That'll definitely go well." She laughed, because the alternative was to panic, and panicking wouldn't help anyone. The storm began to ease around the bay, the lightning strikes coming farther apart, the thunder losing its edge. The emergency lights stopped flickering and settled into their normal dim glow. Outside, Fiona could hear the first sounds of the outpost starting to recover. Shouted voices, the whine of repair drones, the general chaos of people checking to see what had survived. She should go out there, should check on her other cargo, should see if any of her contracts had been damaged by the storm, should be a responsible business owner. Instead, she sat on her crate and watched 2 Nexian cubs sleep, and wondered when exactly her life had gotten this weird. You know, she said quietly, I came to Rendix 9 to get away from complications, from corporate politics and family expectations and all the strings that come with living on Earth. I wanted simple. I wanted cargo runs and quiet nights, and maybe the occasional exciting moment that didn't involve potential death by predator pack. Little shifted in its sleep, and its thrumming purr started up again, a sound like distant thunder. But I guess the universe had other plans, Fiona finished. The universe always has other plans. She dimmed the lights and settled in to wait for morning, when she'd have to face the consequences of her impulsive compassion. The cubs slept on, safe and warm, and completely unaware that they'd just complicated approximately everything. Outside, the storm finally broke, and Rendix 9's 3 moons emerged from behind the clouds, casting pale light across the battered outpost. Tomorrow would bring new problems, new dangers, and probably a confrontation that would test whether humans really deserved their reputation as the galaxy's most stubborn species. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, Fiona had 2 baby predators to watch over, and somehow, impossibly, that felt like enough. Morning on Rendix 9 arrived with all the subtlety of a cargo ship crash landing. The suns, plural, because the universe apparently believed in overkill, rose in tandem, flooding the outpost with harsh light that made everything look worse than it actually was, which, given the storm damage, was saying something. Fiona woke up with a crick in her neck from sleeping on a cargo crate, 2 Nexian cubs using her as a heated blanket, and the certain knowledge that today was going to test every survival instinct she possessed. Okay, she said, carefully extracting herself from the pile of sleeping predators. Today's agenda: find a pack of terrifying hunters, return their cubs, and somehow avoid getting torn into human-sized confetti. Easy. Totally doable. Big yawned, displaying an impressive array of teeth that had definitely grown overnight. Or maybe Fiona just hadn't noticed them properly before, and stretched like a cat. Little was already awake, watching Fiona with those unsettlingly intelligent eyes. Don't look at me like that, Fiona told Little. I'm not keeping you. This isn't some heartwarming story about found family and stop purring, that's not helping. But Little was purring, that deep thrumming that made Fiona's chest resonate. And now Big was doing it too, and they were both looking at her like she was the center of their universe, and Fiona felt her resolve crumbling in real time. No, absolutely not. You have a pack out there somewhere, and they want you back. And I am not equipped to raise apex predators. She opened her cargo bay door, and the morning light spilled in along with the sounds of the outpost recovering. Come on, let's go find your family before I do something stupid like get attached. The cubs followed her out of the bay, staying close to her legs in a way that was both adorable and a significant tripping hazard. The marketplace was a disaster. Overturned stalls, scattered goods, and scorch marks where the lightning had struck. A repair crew was working on the main power junction, and various merchants were assessing the damage to their inventory with expressions ranging from resigned to apoplectic. Fiona had made it about 20 steps when the whispers started. Is that? Are those Nexian? Why does the human have... She ignored them, focused on getting to the outpost's central hub, where the communication arrays were. If there was any information about the pack's location, it would be logged there. The cubs trotted along beside her, occasionally stopping to sniff something interesting before hurrying to catch up. That's when she heard it, a sound that made every merchant in the marketplace freeze. A howl, long, low, and unmistakably Nexian. It echoed off the buildings and seemed to come from everywhere at once, a sound designed by evolution to trigger prey responses in anything with functioning ears. The cubs' heads snapped up simultaneously, and they started chirping, a rapid-fire series of calls that Fiona's universal translator couldn't parse, but that clearly meant something urgent. "Oh, that's not good," Fiona said, which was the understatement of the morning and possibly her entire life. A second howl answered the first, closer this time. Then a third. The pack was triangulating, coordinating, hunting, and they were moving fast. The marketplace emptied like someone had pulled a fire alarm. Species of all types scrambled for cover. Into buildings, onto rooftops, anywhere that wasn't directly in the path of whatever was coming. A four-armed Tellurian merchant abandoned an entire cart of expensive electronics in his haste to get away. "Right," Fiona said, her voice remarkably steady considering her heart was trying to escape through her throat. "Guess we're doing this now." She could run, should run. Every tactical bone in her body was screaming at her to run. But the cubs were chirping more urgently now, pulling at her pant leg with their teeth. Not hard enough to tear, but insistent. And Fiona realized with absolute certainty that running would make everything worse. So she stood her ground in the middle of the marketplace, with two Nexian cubs at her feet, and waited for the pack to arrive. They came around the corner like a force of nature given physical form. 6 adult Nexians, each easily the size of an earth grizzly bear, moving with a coordination that spoke of years hunting together. Their scales were the same obsidian black as the cubs, but more pronounced, with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in sync. A pack breathing as one organism. Their claws clicked against the metal plating of the marketplace floor, a staccato rhythm that sounded like a countdown. And at the front, larger than the rest, and carrying herself with unmistakable authority, was the Pack Alpha. She was magnificent and absolutely terrifying in equal measure. Battle scars crisscrossed her scales, each one a story of survival and dominance. Her bioluminescent markings were brighter than the others, pulsing with an intensity that suggested either extreme emotion or extreme danger. Possibly both. Her eyes, amber and sharp and filled with an intelligence that made Fiona's skin prickle, locked onto the cubs with laser focus. Then they locked onto Fiona. The marketplace, already quiet, went silent in a way that suggested everyone had stopped breathing. The Pack Alpha took a step forward. Her lips pulled back, revealing teeth that could punch through starship hulls. A low growl built in her chest, a sound that Fiona felt in her bones more than heard with her ears. This was it. This was how Fiona died. Death by protective mother, which honestly was probably going to be on the list of stupid ways humans died on the frontier, and would make her a cautionary tale for the next 5 generations. But then, the cubs did something Fiona absolutely did not expect. They moved in front of her, placed themselves between Fiona and the pack, and chirped, high-pitched, rapid, defiant. The Pack Alpha stopped mid-step, her growl cutting off like someone had flipped a switch. Her head tilted, and confusion flickered across her reptilian features, an expression that shouldn't have been readable on an alien face, but somehow was. The cubs chirped again, more insistent, little pressed back against Fiona's legs, and big puffed up to appear larger, which would have been more impressive if it wasn't still the size of a house cat. They were defending her. 2 baby Nexians, probably not even weaned yet, were trying to protect a human from their own pack. The Pack Alpha looked at Fiona, at the cubs, at Fiona again. The other pack members shifted restlessly, waiting for a signal, their muscles coiled and ready. Fiona, operating on instinct and possibly insanity, did the only thing she could think of. She spoke. "I found them in the storm," she said in galactic common, her voice steady despite the adrenaline singing through her veins. "They were hurt, separated. I just—" She gestured helplessly at the cubs. "I couldn't leave them." The pack alpha's eyes narrowed. She took another step forward, slow and deliberate, and the cubs tensed but didn't back down. Little's injured paw was shaking, but it stayed planted firmly between Fiona and potential danger. Fiona noticed details now, the way the alpha's nostrils flared, scenting, the way her eyes tracked to Little's bandaged paw, to Big's slightly less protruding ribs, the way her bioluminescent patterns shifted from aggressive red to something more cautious, more thoughtful. "I treated the burn," Fiona continued, because apparently she couldn't stop talking when faced with imminent death. "Fed them. Kept them safe during the storm. They imprinted. I didn't know they would imprint. I just wanted to help. And now—" She stopped, realizing she was rambling. "I was going to find you. To return them. I'm not trying to steal your cubs." The pack alpha's head tilted the other way, a gesture so reminiscent of the cubs that Fiona felt something in her chest tighten. Then the alpha did something that made every watching alien gasp in shock. She sat. Just sat. Lowered her haunches to the ground in a movement that was clearly deliberate, clearly significant. The universal sign of non-aggression across dozens of species. The rest of the pack, after a moment of visible confusion, followed suit. Fiona's legs were shaking. She locked her knees to keep from collapsing and tried to remember how breathing worked. The pack alpha made a sound, not a growl, not a howl, but something softer, questioning. She looked at the cubs, and they chirped back, that thrumming purr starting up again. Then the alpha looked at Fiona, and her lips pulled back, not in aggression, but in what Fiona desperately hoped was the Nexian equivalent of a non-threatening expression. She started moving forward again, slower this time, her body language careful. The cubs stayed in position, but stopped bristling, their purrs growing louder. Fiona held absolutely still as the pack alpha approached, close enough now that Fiona could see her reflection in those amber eyes, close enough that one swipe of those claws could end everything. The alpha sniffed the cubs, a thorough examination that checked every inch of them. Then she sniffed Fiona, and Fiona had never felt more evaluated in her entire life. The alpha's breath was hot against her face, smelling of meat and something sharper, almost electric. Then the alpha made a sound, a low rumble that seemed to resonate through the ground, and touched her snout gently to Fiona's forehead. The marketplace erupted in shocked whispers. Fiona stood frozen, hardly daring to believe what was happening. The pack alpha had just acknowledged her, accepted her, recognized something that Fiona didn't fully understand, but that felt monumental in ways she couldn't articulate. The alpha stepped back, and the cubs immediately rushed to her, climbing over her legs and chirping excitedly. She nuzzled them with a gentleness that contradicted everything about her fearsome appearance, checking them over with maternal thoroughness. But when Little tried to stay by her side, the cub looked back at Fiona, then at the alpha, clearly torn, and the alpha, this massive battle-scarred apex predator, looked at Fiona with something that might have been understanding, might have been respect, and rumbled again. A translator unit crackled to life from somewhere in the watching crowd. A voice, shaky and disbelieving, translated, "She says, the pack acknowledges the human as kin. The cubs have chosen. The choice is honored." Fiona's brain tried to process that and failed spectacularly. Fiona's brain, which had been working overtime trying to keep her alive for the past 12 hours, decided this was an excellent time to blue screen. "I'm sorry," she said slowly, looking at the translator unit like it might have malfunctioned. "Did that say kin?" The pack alpha rumbled again, and the translator crackled. "The human protected our young, healed them. The cubs claim her as pack. We honor this." "Right," Fiona said faintly. "Right, of course. Why wouldn't I be adopted by a pack of apex predators before my morning caffeine? That's just how this week is going." The alpha's expression, and Fiona was getting disturbingly good at reading Nexian expressions, might have been amusement. Her bioluminescent patterns shifted to a warm gold, and she made a huffing sound that the translator didn't bother with, but that felt distinctly like laughter. From the surrounding buildings, aliens were starting to emerge from hiding, drawn by morbid curiosity, and the fact that nobody was getting eaten. A crowd was forming, keeping a respectful distance but definitely watching. Fiona spotted Polo, a Brenthari merchant she'd done cargo runs for, clutching his translator unit like a lifeline. "Polo!" Fiona called out, seizing on something familiar in this deeply surreal situation. "A little help here?" Polo scuttled forward with obvious reluctance, his forearms fidgeting. "Human Fiona, you are aware that what just happened is unprecedented?" "I'm getting that impression, yeah. Nexians don't acknowledge outsiders as pack. Ever. Their social structure was thought to be completely closed to other species." Polo's translator was working overtime on his rapid speech. "The scientific community is going to lose their collective minds when they hear about this." "Fantastic! I've always wanted to be a research paper." Fiona looked at the pack alpha, who was watching this exchange with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. "So, what does this mean, exactly? Am I supposed to go hunting with them now? Learn to howl? Give up using doors?" The alpha made a sound, and Polo's translator interpreted, "The human may live as she chooses. The pack acknowledges her bond with the young ones. She is under our protection. Any who harm her will answer to us." "Oh," Fiona said. "That's actually kind of nice? Terrifying, but nice." "The cubs will want to see you," the translator continued, "to learn from you as they learn from the pack. This is the way of our young." Fiona looked down at Little and Big, who were now playing at the alpha's feet, but kept glancing back at her like they were making sure she wasn't going anywhere. Little's bandaged paw seemed to be bothering it less, and Big was already trying to wrestle one of the adult pack members, a losing battle, but points for confidence. "I have a cargo business," Fiona said, which seemed important to establish. "I can't just drop everything to raise your kids. I'm barely qualified to raise houseplants." The alpha's patterns pulsed. Definitely amusement now. The translator said, "We do not ask you to be their only teacher. Only to be what you already are. Pack." Something about the way that was phrased made Fiona's throat tight. Pack. Family. Belonging. All the things she'd left Earth to escape because human families came with too many expectations and not enough acceptance. And here was a pack of alien apex predators offering exactly what she'd been running from, but without the strings attached. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. "Okay," Fiona said, surprising herself. "Okay, I can do that. They can visit. I'll check in. But I'm keeping my cargo runs, and if they break anything in my bay, you're paying for it." The alpha's huffing sound came again, and she dipped her head in what was clearly agreement. Then she did something even more unexpected. She stood, walked past Fiona to her cargo bay, and marked the entrance with a scent gland on her neck. Polo made a strangled sound. "She just claimed your territory as pack space. That makes it sacred ground to Nexians. No one will dare touch it now." So, I've got the galaxy's most effective security system. Fiona watched as the other pack members took turns marking her bay's entrance. Good to know my insurance premiums aren't going to waste. The cubs, apparently bored with the adult conversation, bounded back to Fiona and started climbing her legs again. She caught them before they could shred her pants completely and found herself holding two purring apex predators like they were oversized cats. "You two are going to be the death of me," she told them. "You know that, right?" Little nuzzled her chin, and Big tried to eat her hair. "Yeah, that's what I thought." The pack alpha approached one more time, and Fiona tensed, but the big Nexian just touched her nose to each cub, then to Fiona's shoulder in a gesture that felt ceremonial. Final. The alpha's amber eyes met Fiona's, and something passed between them. An understanding that transcended language. A recognition of one protector to another. Then the alpha turned and howled, a sound that echoed across the outpost and made every survivor of the storm remember why Nexians were apex predators. The pack answered, a chorus that raised the hair on Fiona's arms and made her heart pound with something that wasn't quite fear. The message was clear. The human was pack now. Anyone with a problem could take it up with them. The pack began to leave, moving as one coordinated unit back toward the outpost's perimeter. The cubs squirmed in Fiona's arms, torn between following and staying, making distressed sounds that pulled at something deep in her chest. "Go on," Fiona said, setting them down. "They're your family. Go." Little hesitated, looking up at her with those huge eyes, then carefully licked her hand with a tongue that was surprisingly rough. Big head-butted her knee one more time, definitely going to bruise, and chirped. Then they were running after the pack, their small legs pumping to keep up, occasionally looking back to make sure Fiona was still watching. She stood there until they disappeared around a building, her hand tingling where Little had licked it, her knee throbbing where Big had said goodbye. "Well," Polo said, materializing at her elbow, "that was the most interesting morning this outpost has seen in 6 years. Glad I could provide entertainment." Fiona turned back toward her cargo bay, suddenly exhausted. "I need about 16 cups of coffee, and a very long nap. The merchants will talk about this for months, possibly years." Polo was practically vibrating with excitement. A human, accepted by a Nexian pack. The xenobiology journals will have a field day. Great. Tell them to spell my name right in the papers. Fiona paused at her bay entrance, looking at the scent marks the pack had left. They were faintly luminescent, pulsing with that same bioelectric signature. "Polo, seriously, what have I gotten myself into?" "Something unprecedented," Polo said thoughtfully. "But also, something rather beautiful, I think. You saved their young without thought for your own safety. They recognized that courage. Honor met honor, as they say." "I'm not brave," Fiona said. "I just couldn't walk away." "Yes," Polo agreed. "That's what makes it brave." 3 days later, Fiona was loading cargo for a run to the orbital station when the cubs showed up. They were bigger, noticeably bigger because, apparently, Nexian growth rates were ridiculous, and they'd brought her a gift. Something small and dead, and definitely not appetizing, laid carefully at the entrance to her bay. "Oh, you shouldn't have," Fiona said, staring at the deceased rodent-adjacent creature. "No, really, you shouldn't have." But Little and Big were purring with pride, and their bioluminescent patterns were pulsing with excitement, and Fiona found herself picking up the gift with a forced smile. "Thank you," she said. "This is great. Very thoughtful." The cubs bounced around her legs, chirping and play fighting, and Fiona realized with a mix of horror and something warm that this was going to be her life now. Random visits from predator cubs, gifts of dubious origin, being part of something larger than herself, whether she'd planned for it or not. She pulled out her datapad and took a photo of the cubs. For documentation purposes, she told herself, definitely not because they were kind of adorable when they weren't being terrifying. Big tried to eat the datapad. Little sat and watched with that too intelligent gaze. "Come on," Fiona said, shooing them away from her equipment. "If you're going to visit, you're going to learn some rules. Rule 1, don't eat my stuff. Rule 2, see Rule 1. The cubs ignored her completely and started investigating her cargo crates. Fiona sighed and sent a message to her next client. Delivery might be delayed. Family emergency. It wasn't technically a lie. This was her family now. Strange, scaly, apex predator family that communicated in howls and brought her dead things as presents. She'd come to Rendix 9 for simplicity, for quiet, for cargo runs that didn't involve emotional complications. The universe, as always, had other plans. But as Fiona watched the cubs play in her cargo bay, their movements already showing hints of the deadly grace they'd grow into, their purrs resonating through the metal walls, she found she didn't mind as much as she'd expected. Yeah, her life had gotten weird. But weird, she was discovering, wasn't necessarily bad. The pack Alpha appeared at the entrance to the bay, silent as death despite her size, and Fiona jumped about 3 feet in the air. "You need to wear a bell," Fiona said, hand over her racing heart. The Alpha's expression was definitely amusement. She watched her cubs for a moment, then looked at Fiona and made a low rumble that didn't need translation. It was approval, gratitude, trust. Then she was gone, melting back into the outpost's shadows, leaving Fiona with 2 energetic cubs and the certain knowledge that her life would never be boring again. "Right then," Fiona said to the cubs, "who wants to learn about cargo manifests?" Big knocked over a crate. Little tried to climb into the cockpit. Fiona laughed, actually laughed, because what else could she do? She'd come to the frontier to escape complications, but somehow she'd found something better, something real, something that acknowledged her not for what she could do or who she was supposed to be, but simply for what she'd done in a moment of compassion during a storm. The cubs chirped in unison, and Fiona got back to work, stepping over baby predators and accepting that this was her normal now. And honestly, it wasn't the worst thing that had ever happened to her. Not even close.